Welcome to episode 51 and the law rapport. In today's episode, I'm going to look at the law in the Turks and Caicos Islands on trespassing and begging. And I was asked to do this episode by an ardent viewer of this channel. Before I do my usual disclaimer, nothing that I say in this episode is legal advice, should be construed as legal advice. For legal advice, please contact an attorney of your choice. I'll be back shortly. Trespass is the illegal entering of another person's property. In some cases, the act of entering the property may have been lawful if permission was granted originally, but that entry could subsequently become trespass if that permission ends or is withdrawn. So, for example, you permit someone to enter your property, even a police officer, and at some stage you ask that person to leave, and if they refuse to, then they become a trespasser. Trespassing is usually a civil wrong and is dealt with civilly. For example, in England and Wales, and I mention England and Wales for two reasons. One, because most of our laws in the Turks and Caicos Islands are carbon copy of the UK, and two, the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council is our final court of appeal, so to speak, in the Turks and Caicos Islands. So although in England and Wales, trespassing is a civil wrong, there are certain forms of trespassing that concerns or that are covered by the criminal law. For example, like squatting, and these offences are covered under the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act of 1994, sections 61 and 62 deals with trespassing on land and with vehicles. In the Turks and Caicos Islands, trespass is a summary offence, and it is dealt with at section 11 of the Summary Offences Ordinance. And for the purpose of this episode, we are just dealing with trespassing as is covered by the Summary Offences Ordinance. So for example, we are not dealing with trespassing where there's a criminal intent or criminal element, like a burglary, for example, where one of the elements that a person must enter as a trespasser and stole items from the property, or a person entered the premises as a trespasser with intent to commit a serious offense. We are dealing with just plain, simple trespassing. And section 11A of the Summary Offences Ordinance states that any person who, without lawful authority enters upon the property of another against the will of the person lawfully entitled to occupation of such property, or B, having lawfully entered upon the property of another without lawful authority, excuse remains upon that property after having been requested by the person entitled to occupation thereof, or some person authorized by him or by a police officer or by a police officer to leave that property, commits an offense and is liable on conviction to a fine of $100 or to a term of imprisonment for 1 month or both. So, if someone enters onto property and they have no lawful authority to enter upon that property, or they enter upon that property against the will of the person who owns the property or who is in lawful occupation of the property, then that person commits the offense of trespassing. Or alternatively, if that person entered upon that property lawfully and they ask to leave and they refuse to, then they would have committed an offense. Typical example, IGA supermarket is a publicly accessible property, but it is private property because it's privately owned, but the public have access to go there to do business. So if someone enters there lawfully to trade, to buy goods from the supermarket, and something happens, whether they are suspected of stealing or they have been unduly rude to cashier or another customer, or they cause some sort of disturbance, and they ask to leave, because the management of IG will be entitled in those circumstances to ask that person to leave, no matter that IGA supermarket, Graceway supermarket, or any other supermarket or business place in the Turks and Caicos is publicly accessible. Once they ask to leave and they remain on the property, then they become a trespasser. And if the police is called and the police request that the person to leave and the person refuses to leave, then that person becomes a trespasser, could be charged for trespassing, and if convicted, will be liable to be fined $100 or imprisonment of 1 month or both. Now, if when asked to leave, the person leave voluntarily and within a reasonable time, the offense of trespassing is not made out. He has not committed the offense of trespassing. If when asked to leave, he leaves. It is only if he remains on the premises when asked to leave that he will be liable for the offense of trespassing. I hope I am clear. Now, another scenario, using Graceway Supermarket as an example. If the person is asked to leave the supermarket for any of the reasons that I pointed out above, causing a disturbance, being a nuisance, attempting to steal something, etc., the management or the owner of the supermarket could say, you are not to return to these premises for the next year, or for the next 6 months, or for the next 3 months. So, in other words, that person has been trespassed from those premises. If he returns in contravention of those terms, then he's a trespasser. Even if his intention is to do lawful business with the supermarket, he has committed the offense of trespassing and is liable to be charged and convicted. The next offence that I've been asked to deal with is that of begging. And yes, begging is an offence in the Turks and Caicos Islands and in several Caribbean countries. The shame of this offence, in my view, is that our colonial master, the United Kingdom, has given its dependencies and overseas territories a raft of offences that we call small acts offences like begging, loitering, etc. And these offences are being abolished in England and Wales, but the politicians and the legislature of these countries in the Caribbean still keep these offences on the books. So in the Turks and Caicos Islands, begging is also an offence under the Summary Offences Ordinance, Section 22. In England and Wales, previously, under the Vagrancy Act of 1822, Section 3, a person could have been arrested for begging and liable to a fine of £1,000. However, in 2022, that law was repealed. But in 2023, there have been some debate in England and Wales in dealing with what they call antisocial behavior. And it is suggested by some persons who are part of that debate that the government intends to reintroduce begging through the back door by embedding it in a new antisocial legislation. For example, it is argued that the government intends to give local communities and local authorities powers to target those deemed to be causing public distress, including those who block shop doorways or beg next to cash machines. And one of the reasons why this law and begging was repealed in the United Kingdom, in England and Wales specifically, is because it was thought that it impacted disproportionately on homeless people, the unfortunate. And so it was unfair and disproportionate to have persons who find themselves in an unfortunate situation being arrested for begging. The argument is that the government now wants to bring it back through the back door. Now I'll move on to the Turks and Caicos Islands. So Section 22 of the Summary Offences Ordinance deals with begging, and it says, any person who A, places himself in any public place for the purpose of begging, or B, enters upon property of another without the permission of that person entitled to occupation thereof, or some other person authorized to give such permission, and so enters for the purpose of begging, commits an offense and is liable on conviction to a fine of $100 or a term of imprisonment for 1 month. And subsection 2 states that nothing in subsection 1 applies to a person who solicits donation as an authorized collector for on behalf of any public or charitable cause. So if you are begging for charity or some public cause, you are exempted from this legislation or this act or section 22 of the Summary Offences Ordinance. So begging is an offense in the Turks and Caicos Islands. Here is where I will leave it for today. I thank you for watching, and I will see you in another episode.